Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Hi, my name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. Our guest today on Capitol Preview is Senator Dan Dawson, Republican, District 8 from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Senator, thanks for coming in here this morning and talking to our folks.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this show, is about a lot about what's going on at the State House and in Iowa in general, and so we bring representatives and senators in to talk about what's hot on their issue right now. And so I'm just going to start off by asking about the Senate Judiciary. They recently passed an omnibus bill. Kind of explain a little bit to our viewers what that omnibus bill is about.
Yes, so after we concluded our judiciary last spring, the chairman, Senator Brad Zahn, and myself, we kind of sat down as being the vice chair, and we tried to discuss what went right, what we can do better. And one of the things we noted was that we haven't really taken a holistic look at our criminal code for many years. A lot of times we were responding to bills that were coming towards us from various departments or whatnot, but we hadn't done a very good job as to actually giving some TLC to our criminal code. Mm-hmm. So we kind of spent the summer a little bit kicking around ideas and meeting with various groups, various participants in the criminal justice system, trying to figure out, again, what's working and what needs to be updated. One of the things that we've constantly struggled with quite a bit in the House and the Senate is trying to find a way to give people a second chance, a way for to acknowledge those persons who made a mistake in their past, a way to remove that mistake from their record, providing that they have shown some type of good conduct along those lines there. So a lot of times, those mistakes end up being a bar for moving up in your employment or trying to find a job with special licenses that, would preclude you from some certain kinds of convictions. We felt we did a pretty good job trying to be diligent and making sure that some charges were always, you couldn't walk away from those. For instance, if you're going to abuse an elderly dependent, that's something that we think is probably more serious that people should always have some awareness of whatever job you go to. Mm-hmm. Child abuse, that was another thing too. So we end up, part of this omnibus bill, the first part is what we describe as giving people a second chance. Inside that is if you have proven good conduct over the course of 8 years, you have the ability to go back and expunge one misdemeanor record. And that we feel is going to help remove some barriers for persons with employment and help them actually move up and again show that they have repaid their debt to society by realizing they made a mistake, give them a second chance. Mm-hmm. Another part of the bill is we've had some antiquated federal regulations that we've had state code that has corresponded to over the years. And what those regulations are is that if you have any kind of narcotic arrest, you have an automatic 6-month revocation of your license. Well, that really impacts the rural areas quite a bit because you don't have a neighbor next door to take you to work. You don't have someone down the street. So a lot of times those individuals end up having to reoffend just to provide for their families. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we kind of looked back in that law a little bit was that it wasn't tied to driving. Any narcotics offense whatsoever, you would have an automatic 6-month revocation. So we've reframed that section of the code so that clearly if you are under the influence of some kind of narcotic, then you still have to pay a penalty, but it shouldn't always mean an automatic 6-month revocation because the problem is that a lot of times when persons do find themselves in custody and were arrested for a charge, what would happen is that they would pay back all the fines, do all restitution, and after that process is completed, they get hit with another 6-month revocation. And you kind of almost end up keeping people down further as opposed to trying to get them back and paying their debts to society. So that was a big portion of the bill that we looked at. And right now in the state of Iowa, we revoke almost 5,000 licenses a year under that particular chapter of the code, most of which have nothing to do with driving. Another portion of the codes, we want to take a look at our property crime values. In the state of Iowa, we have not updated our property crimes since 1999. And a lot of times we have to ask ourselves is that are we producing more felons than we were back in 1999 purely by proxy of not adjusting those property crime values. So we scrubbed through all of those and working with the county attorneys and some other groups there, we found some new values there to help kind of realize inflation prices, and get the code back to probably where it was, or where we would like it to be at regarding those values. And then finally, we went through a whole lot of Supreme Court rulings, things that we haven't really done a good job as a legislative body to understand what the rulings actually mean, how they impact the criminal code, and does the legislature have to have a response to address those rulings. A lot of times for complexities in the code, a lot of times just bad way the language was written wasn't very clear in the first place. So that's a larger part of the bill. But from the Senate, we're pretty excited about that bill. It's one of the larger review packages we've done in quite some time. We think it's going to go a long ways to updating our code, giving people a second chance, and providing some relief on the system overall. So.
Sounds like you guys have done some good work, thorough work. It's
been about a 5-month process, but a lot of phone calls back and forth with the chair, myself, and different groups, but we're pretty happy with the product we came up with.
It sounds like it. The House and Senate are looking at different versions of what's called the dynamic park pricing. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think a lot of us are kind of excited about a little bit. And again, trying to look at our code and what's right and what's not working we can do better is that we've got a lot of state parks across the state that have some really neat facilities. They've built up some really nice cabins, things along those lines over the last few years. But we have always, through state code, we have specified that you can only charge one rate for every day. When the reality is that we have some cabins that are in better areas as opposed to other areas of a park. We have some seasons that are peak seasons and are portions that are peak seasons and times that aren't. So what this kind of does is it gives the Department of Natural Resources some flexibility to look at what is being used best and where they can improve. For instance, we have cabins that don't get used that much in the month of February. So we want to give the DNR some flexibility to say, hey, if you buy one day, we'll give you 2 free, to try to increase traffic more to those parks and to those resources, and hopefully get people more engaged with the conservation and the outdoors. So something we're kind of excited about a little bit. Hopefully we have an opportunity to work with both chambers there and synchronize our language and get that bill moving forward, but should provide some additional relief for the Department of Natural Resources and allows them to better utilize the facilities that we've constructed over there, which are some really beautiful facilities.
And where's that bill now in the process?
That is currently in both Ways and Means chambers, so hopefully to have those out of committee here within the next week. I hope
for
so.
final week. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The Ways and Means is looking at restructuring the criminal fees and surcharges. Do you want to explain that a little bit, Tara?
Yeah, that was something that kind of dovetails with the omnibus bill almost, where we started looking at the policy. We started looking at, how do people get back into the system more successfully and reduce some of those barriers. One of the things we've noticed, this has been a multi-decade process where the legislative body has increased surcharges or increased these different little money consequences out there, if you will, while they've done the fine. So the example I give is that you could have someone who has been arrested for drug paraphernalia, let's say have a pot pipe, and they would get a $100 fine in court. But the way we've increased surcharges over the years, that they would automatically have a law enforcement surcharge, about $125. They would have a 35% criminal surcharge off that $100 fine. They have a $60 court fine on top of that, and then finally, for the cherry on the top, if you will, is that you would have a $10 drug, basically a drug awareness fund charge that goes to DARE type programs. So on your $100 fine that you actually receive by the court, you would have upwards of almost $200 in surcharges and additional fines on top of that. So what we're trying to do is wipe the slate clean, get to more of a truth in sentencing, and so people actually show up to court and say, this is actually what your fine really is. And we're trying to reduce and take away a lot of those surcharges while increasing the fine to get more of a truth in sentencing, if you will. We feel that will, again, go a long ways to having people pay back their debts. They'll understand better in their sentencing process of what their liabilities are, and again, improve the overall system.
Senator, I know you're in law enforcement. I probably should have asked this at the beginning, but what do you do when you're not up here serving Iowans in the legislature?
Yeah, so I work for the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation on my other side of my life.
Okay.
Work in the Major Crimes Unit, done that for the last almost 8 years now. I've been a law enforcement officer for 18 years. I started off with the Council Bluffs Police Department and then went to the state a few years after that.
So I can hear that criminal background and the things that you're taking up at the Senate.
Yeah.
So, So how do you think the Senate is, or how do you think the legislature is going this year? I mean, are you happy with the progress that are made in some of the bigger pieces of law? Or
Yeah, no, I think, and of course my perspective is very short for the duration I've been there, but I'm happy to see that this year that both bodies aren't shy from addressing big issues. A lot of times, you talk around persons in the past, the second year of a General Assembly is more of a laid-back year. Persons are wanting to kind of get into election cycle a little bit and look towards October, November for the issues that those individuals will face there. But one of the things I'm probably most proud about for my colleagues is that this isn't business as usual, and that there isn't a willingness to address big issues out there. Now, of course, that all depends on what we can get done by the time we adjourn in April. A lot of times we address issues, but maybe not get it crossed all the way across the finish line there. But I've certainly been happy to see that the desire out there to deal with those big topics is still there.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like it is there this year.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to make it out on April the 15th, I think it is?
We're all absolutely hopeful we can. I think that probably the biggest decision piece will be tax reform.
Yeah.
Can the chambers and the governor's office all come together on a deal? That will, I think everything will probably depend on that issue. So.
There's also various cannabis bills in the legislature, some of which remove the THC limit of 3%. What are your thoughts about those bills and what they're going to accomplish?
Yeah, that's kind of a complicated question, and in some ways we're almost rehashing some of the issues of last year and the last few years. One of, from my background is professional knowledge a little bit, and the other portion of my past is that I always get concerned when we're talking about removing THC limits entirely. I think everyone acknowledges the reality is that if the federal government was to make this a Schedule II, we could actually get some good research, and I think would help guide our legislative decision-making process a whole lot more. But one of the things I'm always cautioning my colleagues about is that the marijuana today isn't what the marijuana was back in the 70s. Typically back then about 3 to 5% THC. Today's marijuana, you're going to have about 5 to 7%. If you get some high-grade Mexican marijuana from Mexico, it's going to be around 13, 15%.
Wow.
And one of my concerns with this whole process is that, some of the companies that we're looking at distributing those products, which have a genuine medical component to it, and there's people out there that do need these products for certain ailments. But one of my concerns last year was that some of the companies were not wanting the THC as well to give them more ability to distribute their products in different types of forms and configurations. And some of those companies already offer 30% THC in some of their products. So going back to what I was saying earlier, it's, when some of the strongest marijuana you're going to find out there is around 15%, and we have some companies having 30%, they still don't want a THC limit. Kind of causes me to pause and step back a little bit, especially when we talk about the opioid epidemic that we're dealing with right now here, where that's a process that started decades ago to get to where we're at right now. And part of the reason was, not to put the whole blame on, but was some of the pharmaceutical companies. And so one of the questions I have is that, are we repeating history again? Or that's a concern, is if we take off THC limits, are we really handing the keys over to these companies? And while THC and heroin are two entirely different components, nevertheless, are we going to find ourselves in some type of problem down the road until we can better understand this issue? So I think there's a lot of concern regarding the THC limit. I'm not sure where we land on that, but I don't think we would be removing the THC limit in the end.
Well, Senator Dawson, our time is up. We appreciate very much our conversation, very informative, and I appreciate Senator Dan Dawson from Council Bluffs joining us here this morning on Capitol Preview. Thank you.